That gray is very,
Yeah.
it adds a little wisdom to you, you
And
know?
I hope that's the case. Yeah, yeah. You always look good. I've got four grandkids now, so I think I'm earning the gray.
I got three, so I know what you mean. They are
Yeah,
so wonderful, but you sit back and think, oh my gosh, am I at that point in my life? And yeah, that time just as
yeah,
flies by with kids, and it's so fun to see your grandkids do all that stuff, and you actually look at it and have an expectation that's normal. Whereas the first time through, you say, "Is this normal? Is this not normal?"
right. Yeah,
And
that's right.
then you watch your kids go through it, and just to see your kids be a parent and
Yeah,
just kind of come beside them, love on them, help them, as they're
yeah.
going through that, and just say, "Oh, I'm so glad it's not me." Yeah. Let me watch them a little bit, give you a breather. Here you
Yeah,
go. I'm going home. I'm going to go to bed on time tonight.
yeah. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Exactly
What's the
right.
ages of your kids?
My kids are 32, 30, 29, and then 21.
Oh,
We
wow.
had a surprise. We had a kid 8 years after our third kid that we were not expecting. So, and he's getting ready to graduate from college. So, um,
Okay.
that's been great to have him around because we had got married really young and had our first kid just 2 years after we got married. So, um, we would have been, I think, maybe a little too young to have an empty nest. So it's been nice to have
Yeah.
another kid around, and then it's also
Well,
been great because he's awesome. So we get to spend a lot of time together.
that's fun.
So.
How was it? How old are your grandkids?
The grandkids are the first two. My son had a daughter. Well, actually, my daughter had a son, and then a few months later, my son had a daughter. So the two oldest ones are just a few months apart. They're both 6. And then my daughter had another son, and he is 3, and then she just had a baby. So he's just a month old. So yeah,
You get the gambit. That's awesome.
yeah, yeah,
That's
yeah.
awesome.
Well, man,
Well,
so how much time do you have today? Do you have 30
uh,
minutes?
45. Let's do
45. Okay,
45.
great,
Yeah.
great.
Yeah, 45, and I can flex a little bit, but I need a little time to transition. So
Yeah,
if we can kind of target
sure.
that.
That'll be fine.
But man, where'd you come up with that list, man? You've been cracking accounting 101?
Yeah, well, I'm in a class. There's a couple things that this interview will accomplish, which is I'm working on my MBA right now, and
Okay.
so I'm in a financial accounting for executives class, and uh, this I will write a paper off of some
Mhm.
of this interview for that class. But
Okay.
what I've been trying to do throughout both my undergrad that I finished and my MBA is whenever I can do something that will serve multiple purposes, I like to
Yeah.
do that. And so as I know Casey was talking to you and I mentioned before, I've been wanting to talk to you for a while. And because these things come up, not maybe in
Yeah.
this level of granularity, but in some of the more general, broad level stuff the music industry studies majors here take a general financial accounting class in the business school, but it doesn't have particularities related to the music industry.
Mhm.
So I've been wanting to start to explore. In fact, I might even try to create a special class about money in the music industry. And
Yeah.
as I talk to Casey and I talk to Kent and I talk to Scott Parker and other people, and I want to talk to you about that probably later. But so this will do a couple things. This interview will probably be something that students will get to watch, and they will be undergrads that are working in music industry studies, either through our
Yep.
agreements and contracts class or publishing. And they will be able to learn some of this stuff for the first time. But I will also glean from it for my master's degree. So
Excellent.
yeah, so what I did was I basically went through stuff I'm learning in the master's level stuff, and I'm trying to apply it to the music industry, as you can tell from some of the questions.
Got it. Got it. It's all good.
And yeah, we won't probably go through all of it, but I've kind of got them grouped into headings, and I think if I was to write the paper I really want to write, it would be way too long for what that professor wants to read in the assignment. So, that's why I organized it the way I did. But yeah, let's just jump in and yeah, I think 45 minutes will be more than enough.
Let's do it.
So first, tell me a little bit about your story and how you got into this field. Did you intend on doing financial work and accounting in the music industry from the beginning, or did you have another path and you just found yourself in that field?
Had another path and found myself in the field. Kind of God directed me in the way I'm at. I started off out of school. I went public accounting, Big Four public accounting, did that whole auditor route, got my CPA, did that side of it for 4 years. Then went industry because I knew I didn't want to stay there forever and worked at a global insurance reinsurance firm. Did some analyst work, controller work, and then an opportunity came along where a company was going through an acquisition mode and they needed to hire a controller and they needed somebody with some computer skills, which is kind of what I had. And so I got hired by EMI Christian Music Group at the time when they were forming Christian Music Group by Sparrow Star Song Forefront and came on board there. And so it was more of, I have a love and passion for music always. I'm not gifted. I can't sing. I can't dance. I have no rhythm, but I know business. I know how to connect the dots. I know how systems and my two themes that I've kind of learned through the years is one, we're in the people business. I tell everybody on my teams that we're in the people business. You got a marketing person, an A&R person that needs somebody paid because they did some service for us or the artist, and they need to talk to somebody. So be a person first and apply the technical stuff second because that's what they're doing. And um, then the second one is for executives. They're going to make a decision whether they have data in front of them or not. They'll shoot from the hip. They will make a decision. So I want to be a good business partner and just come along how to do the deals or how to help make that the better deal or treat the artist right or something. Help them make the right decision with the best information available. So I try to be a good business partner at that level, and I try to make sure it's always a people business serving artists.
Yeah. Did you find or have you found that there are peculiarities about working in the music business that make it unique, or do the principles of finance and accounting apply regardless of what industry you're in?
To some degree, it applies everywhere. You have a payables process, you have a receivables process, you have a billing process, expense report process. So there's the commodity of the assembly line. There's the widget on the assembly line, but how that assembly line looks, how it functions and flows is very different from the medical industry to pharmaceuticals to the music industry. And knowing the business, knowing how to get ahead of something and see it coming, or influence impact in positive ways, the business dictates that that process sometimes flows a little bit differently. You still have to hustle. You still have to be agile. You have to be proactive. But what does that look like in the music industry when you have a video shoot that's happening in 2 days on a Saturday? They're doing the paperwork, and I need the deposit in the morning. So that, understanding the why versus something else, that makes a difference.
Yeah. One more sort of general question. I didn't prepare you for this one, but it just occurs to me that this would probably fit in this part of the conversation. You were you were working in this field and part of the transition from an era when the music industry was driven by the consumption of physical products, CDs, cassettes, back in the day,
Mhm.
vinyl records, into an era when that's a tiny sliver of it. That's less than 10% of the revenue. Now it's all about access to
Mhm.
intellectual property. It's an entire quantum shift in a
Yeah.
completely different paradigm. In broad strokes, what kinds of financial and accounting shifts had to happen to accommodate a quantum shift, a paradigm shift like that for an entire industry to go from ownership to access?
Ownership, that's a big one. If you think at the foundation, let's start from the artist. Artists back in the day would get paid on the album project, the CD, the vinyl. So you would set royalties up for the 10, 12, 13 songs, and you would set it up in lump as one complete package. So you sold one album, the artist got $1 versus you sell 10 tracks and you have to give them 10 cents for which track that's sold of that album and the album too when it's sold. So if you think about how the artist earns the money, the whole finance accounting industry had to adapt every system to track it. So think of it on the royalty system. You had to change all the royalty setups to be track based, not album based. All the producer agreements had to be reset. All the royalty rates and overages when you hit certain thresholds had to be reset. And then if you think on the front end of the process, the recording aspect of it, instead of just throwing everything in one big bucket to be cross recouped together, you then had to set up all your accounting systems to track spend by individual track. So what tracks being produced, which tracks are recouping, doing profit splits on a album level versus a track level. So that yet again changes the dynamics. And then you get back into exploitation. And how do you sell rights in income streams? Sometimes artists will want to sell the rights in streaming because that's what they can sell, and the buying party has no interest in the physical side of it or D2C side of it. So they're only buying selected rights in selected masters. So you have to be able to parse all that out. So long story short is the infrastructure had to be literally blown up and rebuilt.
Wow. And that involves not only a technical thing, there's computer people that have to be able to build technological infrastructure, but there's also logical infrastructure. There's thinking that has to go into that, justifications and arguments and
Mhm.
critical decisions that have to happen because you're not just taking this apple and putting it into this apple pile. You're sometimes taking that apple and turning it into applesauce and then trying to measure
Yeah.
the how many apples went into this applesauce because when you move from track-based things into streaming, now you're saying, okay, we're really licensing this intellectual property and we're
Mhm.
breaking the streams down and saying now it's 1,500 streams or something. And some of the streams are paid for through advertising and some are paid through for
Yep.
subscriptions. So you have to use a lot of judgment. And I imagine, tell me if I'm wrong here, but I imagine that people like you in the finance side and the accounting side are probably in the room with executives who are policymakers and negotiators, and you're having to all sit there and reinvent the wheel, as it were, of how this industry is going to move forward. Am I right? And what was that
It,
like?
it, yes, in the best possible manner, we are in the room. In the other scenarios, you're not in the room, and then you have to come in later and clean it up. And
Make
the
apples back out of the applesauce.
yeah, you're given applesauce, and they want you to put it together and make sure it's a Granny Smith apple, or yeah, but it's yes, it and when it's worked well, you're and you've earned trust to have a seat at the table. You're in the room to help design a good deal that works for everybody that can be administrated. In those times when it's not, I can tell you of a recent situation where it's not, where a catalog was being sold and you're splitting the baby and you have a particular option period and they split it in a way where the new owner only wanted the audio assets and didn't want to pay for the videos. And so the old owner kept the video assets. Sounds good when you're in the room between attorneys. Yeah, yeah, I just don't want to pay you that extra $100,000 for those videos. You keep it, I'll take the rest. But what goes on YouTube for video is they're actually monetizing the audio assets through that. So who gets the money? They didn't think about that. So that's the applesauce that we get to clean up when you're not, helping figure out how to do a good deal based on whatever it is they want to do. Great, we can do that. Let's kind of tweak 10% here, then everybody gets what they want. That's the art of finance helping support a creative's deal desire.
Yeah. And that concept, even that phrase, the art of finance, is something that came up in this course that I'm taking. That struck me. I think I maybe had heard it, but hadn't really had to deal with that or think too deeply about it. When
Hmm.
I heard art of finance, I think I just thought that meant, well, it's complicated and you trust those people to do that fancy thing. But when I heard things like cooking the books or that, I always thought that that was negative, inherently negative, malfeasance or corrupt.
Yeah.
But then we're learning about how a lot of that comes down to judgment calls that are made. And as long as they're made consistently, we choose this approach and how we're going to
Hmm.
recognize earnings, how we're going to accrue things. We're going to make some. So I want to get into the weeds of just a little bit and talk about
Okay.
some of that
Yeah.
stuff because the art side of finance involves a lot of that kind of discernment, but then staying true to the choices that you make and being able to explain that, like you said, to the executives. So it's been really exciting to me and kind of eye-opening. I was able to, when I was at Capital, trust you and trust Kent and people that were on
Yeah.
the admin
Hmm.
side so that you could deliver information and data. And if I was deciding to sign somebody or not, or to let somebody go, I could
It
trust
just
that data.
flowed. Yeah.
Right. Now I'm realizing a little bit more about what the art of finance can mean. So let's talk about a couple of these things. First, when we're talking about when revenue gets recognized, revenue recognition, and how things get accrued. From an accounting and finance perspective, we've got a few choices of how that can be done, right? So when revenue comes in the music industry, streaming royalties have a lag between when that money is going to be recognized and when the stream actually happened. And in
Mhm.
accounting rules, there's the money, there's some
Yeah.
recognition rules. How do you apply that accrual method to recognize the revenue when it's earned rather than when the cash is received? What kind of decisions do you have to make in
Yeah.
this streaming economy?
Okay. So the general rule is you accrue it. Technically, there's two levels of decisions in there. There's the accrual, something you know, but you just don't have the cash yet, and an estimate where you don't know how much you're getting. Let's take the easiest one. I'll take it on the expense side. Say you have a marketing plan and you did a video shoot in December, and you know that was going to cost you $10,000 per the agreement, but they don't invoice you and you don't pay it to January. So you can accrue that $10,000 in December when you actually incurred or spent and did all that activity. That way you can match your revenues and expenses to what actually happened. Well, on the revenue side, sometimes your distributor, or if you are a major, against the DSPs, you know how much they owe you because you have a view of that. So you may know that $10,000 of revenue as an independent, where I'm at now. I know my contract says I don't get that till next month. So I'll accrue that $10,000 of revenue this month. Then there's the estimate, which is when the consumer actually listened to it and then they reported it to the distributor and a major who then reports it to their distributor, the indie. So you got the estimate, the majors think Apple, Spotify, they have what's called marketing data. So they keep up with the volume of listening stats. How many millions and billions of streams are going on, and how much of it is ad supported versus paid. And you can take that data, analyze it, and apply some factors and materially estimate how much your earnings have been. So what we as an indie, we have access through our distributor, Universal, who has a process in place for their own labels. We have line of sight to that. And we know Apple and Spotify make up X% of the market. So we can estimate if we know that as a base, we can back into everything else, materially speaking, and be 90% accurate. So pull all this together is a lot of tools, a lot of analysis can go into it, but we'll estimate things that's happened. We need to be consistent. You can't change your assumptions. That's where auditors and will challenge you on how you came about that. And you need that consistency. And if the data trends change, that's great. You document it and you change it from, You accrue 90% of it to accrue 92% of it because the data says it's justified to do it differently. And then you lock in and you stay there for 6 months to 2 years until the data changes. So you always try to be data led and not just guessing.
Right. Okay. And so then that would also probably apply to whenever you defer things as well. So the percentages of deferrals would also be based on the trending and the data that shows you which data would be accrued and which would be deferred.
Well, like when you talk about deferred revenues,
Hmm.
okay, sometimes you get advances from, let's say, a TikTok, a Facebook, Meta, and they're paying you today for the next 12 months.
Right.
So you can't recognize all that money up front on a cash basis. So you park it on the balance sheet in deferred revenues, a liability. You get the cash, great, and but you haven't earned that income.
Right.
So over time, you know the volume of activity that has been earned. So maybe you earn one, they pay you 1.2 million, and you would think you'd earn 100,000 a month for the next 12 months. But maybe the volume says you've only earned 80,000. So you get to the end and you have 300,000 left over because you only recognize what you've earned to the actual activity. Well,
I
at
see.
the end, you have some money left over. That's called breakage. And that breakage, according to the contract, sometimes most of the time, you don't return it to Meta you basically go back and say, let's look at those 12 months of actual activity, who earned what, and let's prorate that breakage back against the actual earnings. And then you process the breakage as a 13th statement.
Oh, okay. And it
So
just
that's
goes
how
back across the catalog.
it
Okay.
goes back. There's a couple different ways to do it, but in general, that's how it works. You only recognize the income, what's earned on process statements, and then you take the breakage on the back end.
Excellent. So, like, if some accountants wanted to make a really nerdy record, they could call the record the 13th month, and, and only a handful of people would know what they were talking about.
I don't
Um,
know who would listen to that song, but yeah, you could do that.
free money, right? Okay, cool. Let's talk about asset management and how that gets dealt with from an accounting perspective. So, especially when we're talking about intangible assets like music catalogs and copyrights, intellectual property. That's very different than things, you can amortize a recording console or a guitar amplifier or
Mhm.
something that you bought that's physical, and you can say, we expect this thing to last 10 years or 5 years, and we're going to take the what we bought, this asset, and we're going to amortize that over the life of that thing. How does that work with intangible things like a catalog or intellectual property?
Mhm. You still amortize it. You Different companies will have different policies. Let's just take a publishing catalog. So you buy a publishing catalog and you say it's worth X when you buy it for 15 years. You do analysis on 15. I've seen it done 10, 15, and 20 years. You'll still amortize it over 15 years. But what you do is there's a concept called an impairment review. So you have what you paid for the asset, less the amortization after, say, 3 years. So you got 12 more years of future amortization. So you have a net book value at a certain point at the end of 3 years. Now, the accounting rules say you have to make sure whatever asset you have on your books is still worth that amount. So you do a review. So you recast expected revenues for the next 12 to 15 years and take a net present value of all that, compare that against your book value. And as long as your book value is less than what it's worth, then you're okay. But if all of a sudden that song, nobody listens to it anymore, and you can't justify those same earning streams in the future, then you may have to take a write-off against that catalog because it's no longer worth the same as it was when you originally bought it for whatever reason. So you have to constantly own IP. Once a year, you should be best practices. You should be doing an impairment review to make sure it's still valuable.
Okay. Interesting.
Excuse me. Ah, sorry, I was around a lot of flowers yesterday.
Okay.
But go ahead. So,
My whole neighborhood is like a chainsaw festival of cutting up
oh
trees, so
yeah.
it's just dust and everything. Yeah, it's terrible.
So, but yeah, that whole concept of IP asset ownership, you're really just trying to make sure what value is it? And you just try to take that same process when you bought it, where you valued it and said, here's how much I'm willing to give for it. You redo that, you refresh it and say, is it still worth that value? Think of it this way, if you were going to go out there and sell it, how much would you get for it?
Right.
What's that compared to your book value after amortizing it for 3 years? Am I okay or not? That's the same process.
And what kind of factors are going into those decisions today? How have those changed maybe over the last few years? I've heard we hear these announcements about these big multi-million dollar deals to buy Bob Dylan's publishing and master catalogs or Paul Simon's or things like that. But on a day-to-day level, it seems like the long-term value of publishing has gone up in the last 10 years because of people listening to catalog music more because of streaming. This is
Mhm.
anecdotal from my observations. I'm asking you to challenge me if I'm wrong on this, but it seems like when we would buy the records and listen to the records that we owned, that earning would be the continual earning was really limited to radio or if sync placements happened on
That's
those
right.
things. Whereas now, even though I own those Bob Dylan records, they're in my collection. I'm really consuming them through Spotify or Apple.
Mhm.
And so
Yeah.
now publishing is earning more money because of constant consumption. So has that increased the value to where it's actually causing the metrics that people use to value those assets differently? Are people paying higher multiples? Are they going from 5 years earnings to 10 years earnings? Or how has that increased value of publishing or masters, how is that being reflected in what people are willing to pay when they're buying catalogs?
Yeah. You've asked a mouthful, and
Oh,
that this
sorry.
should be a doctoral program of what should you do here. So let me see if I can give you elements of that decision because that's really the value I bring to the table when we're doing these kind of deals. Is there's so many moving parts, and there's no one right answer. It is a jigsaw puzzle to put together. So what the the key pieces in here, you have to know your internal rate of return. So what's it going to cost you to borrow that money? So if you're paying a bank or bondholders 6, 7, 8%, you have to do a 15, 20-year internal rate of return to make sure you're getting above that. Otherwise, why would you do it? So you need to make X amount internal rate of return of your money over time. Then you got to look at what's the catalog worth? How many different ways can it be exploited? You already mentioned you got sync. Is there a lot of sync opportunities there? Is there a lot of D2C opportunities there? Are there, um, if it's a publishing catalog versus master rights, you have the copyright royalty board going up in the rates over the next 5 years. Then you're also looking at Where's where's the consumer? Is it domestic versus international? What's the maturity of that market? So if you're in the US primarily, that's a mature market. You're not going to have that same hockey stick growth curve that you would on, say, Latin America or some of these other markets where you have high usage but low monetization. So as that monetization kicks in over time, you have more upscale opportunities. So you're looking at all those factors and depends on what you're buying and where they're at, you determine your assumptions. And sometimes you assume right and sometimes you assume wrong. But those are all there's a lot of moving parts and we challenge each other on, is this the right approach to this particular deal and where do we see our options to make it better? And then we make our best determination and then we go for
And that would be where things like judgment and bias, managerial professional opinions. That's where you come in and share your perspectives, and then somebody else is gonna ultimately,
Challenge it.
yeah, challenge it.
Yeah.
Um,
Yep.
so when you talk about, I mean, we've already mentioned this, the kind of artistic side of that, but when we talk about the net realizable value of a catalog, uh, are there specific accounting metrics that you are allowing to flow into a number like the net realizable value? Or is that
Um,
is that also part of that art piece? Is that part of
Are
imagining?
you talking about on an acquisition or
Yeah,
selling something?
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. What you have to start with is what rights are being negotiated for. So sometimes you're only selling streaming rights, but you may not be getting PRO or
Oh,
sync rights. Or sometimes you don't get rights to do lyrics from a D2C on a t-shirt, like, the Rolling Stones or anything like that. So you got to know what rights are being negotiated for so that you can then focus your analysis, because you can assume you're getting everything, but then it gets into the weeds and you don't have it, then you've got a gap, and then that's never fun. So I always start with the
right.
rights you're acquiring, and contractually through your attorney, make sure that's clearly defined on how does that work, especially like if you're in the faith-based space, CGLI rights in the collections of that. Who gets to collect domestic versus international? So maybe you're only getting domestic rights and not ex-US rights.
Hmm.
Those are the questions you would want to ask to determine that.
Yeah. Okay. Let's talk about some of the financial analysis stuff and some of the ratios, which we've been working on quite a bit here. The big five ratios, as they're called, things like revenue growth, EPS, EBITDA, free cash flow, return on equity. Um, how do you find those things impact a record company or a music publisher's market value? How do you use those tools a lot? I remember hearing about EBITDA all the time when I was at Capitol when we were working there. But were these other numbers, are they regularly on the scorecard when you're talking with the people that you work with in the music business, or some more than others?
Yeah. Some more than others. It depends on the company if they have a lot of cash, or if they're strapped for cash, or if they're just being good best practice. Sometimes the cash side of it is more prevalent than others. So, but I would say the top two, no matter what, if you're in a best practice scenario, would be EBITDA and free cash flow. So from an EBITDA, how much of that EBITDA is converting to cash? So what you're really looking at is, you'd expect, depends on if you're a label versus a publisher, they have different conversion rates. You would say on average 90% of EBITDA makes it to cash. Now it'll ebb and flow, but is your receivables collections process efficient? Is your payables process efficient? Are you investing heavily or selling? So there's a lot of things that goes into that delta between EBITDA and cash. And if you're managing your balance sheet and your processes, you want to make sure your processes are efficient and clean. So as a CFO type, you want to make sure your systems and your processes are working right. If they are, then you can mainly focus on EBITDA, knowing it's going to convert to cash because that part's working. So that's kind of how they relate. So, but if it's not converting, then you got another problem, and you want to go get up under the hood somewhere and fix it so it does convert to cash, because cash is king.
Well, that's a good segue to that question. So, let's talk about that cash is king thing. And I think that some people who are artists and some people who are faith driven hear cash is king and they get a little itchy and they're like, "Where I'm in this for the ministry, or I'm in this for the art." And what do you mean cash is king? And I think there's a lot of inherent misunderstandings about what that means. And I even remember for me, it was eye-opening to go back and hear people who were involved in missions work back in the 50s saying, without the funds, there is no mission. Without there being the dollars there to do it, then the mission can't happen. And so cash is king might sound a little cold, but it could be the key to you being able to do what your mission is. That's how I've come to understand it. Can you talk about that cash is king principle from an accounting and finance perspective, a CFO's perspective, and how that operating cash flow and that is considered that so important and why and how you can articulate that as a leader to business leaders and A&R people and when they're deciding, what to spend money on, like why is cash is king such an important concept for them?
All right. From a faith-based perspective, and I've also been treasurer and served on some church boards and nonprofit boards, it is funding the ministry. So, end of the day, you can dream as big of a dream. I do trust him to bring the funds in and to fund the ministry as long as you're focused on doing the right thing. So I'm a total believer it's a mechanism and can be used to drive ministry. You got to make sure what ministry you're doing. So set that aside as a CFO, nonprofit church or business. You want to do best practice. You want to be a good steward of resources in all cases. So from that standpoint, the example I tell all my younger uh, proteges and people that are not in the industry, in the music industry, we're investment bankers. We're going to invest in 10 artists. Two of them are going to do good. Three of them are going to do average, and we're going to lose money on five. Now, we don't know who's going to do what. So you have to go sign 10 artists. You have to spend the money to invest on the 10. What you have to then do is what's working, you throw gasoline on that fire. If it's not working, you have to be mature enough to pump the brakes and stop spending money so you can divert it over to what is working because you just have to know five of them are going to lose money. You just don't want to lose a ton of money. You just want to say that's just cost of doing business to find the other five and the two pay for the five. The two that really break out pay for the five, you lose money. That's just the way it works in the music business. It sounds cold, but we are a bank. We have the money. We have the ability to help people get to that next level. And depends on their art, their craft, and how we can connect with consumers is how well that works. And that's why we try. They have a vision, we have a vision. But cash, you're managing cash and you're watching it come in. You have good accounting practices around it, controls, segregation of duties from the proper management of cash. But end of the day, from business decision making, you want to make sure you stay on top of it from a cash perspective so that you can understand what's working, what's not. If you know that it's working or what's not working, you usually can make a good decision from a very simple approach, is what I found. I've worked with some top tier executives. They don't know much financially, but they know I have revenues, I have costs, I'm making money or not making money. If I know I'm not making money, I know what to do. So you usually don't have to present a complicated financial statement to any executive. You just have to help them see what artists and what releases are working. They usually already know why. Oh, the A&R was great. Oh, the A&R sucked. Oh, we spent too much on videos. Let's dial that back and put it more on digital marketing next time. We shouldn't be doing traditional radio promo. We need more digital marketing this next time. They already know. You're more of affirming their gut if they've been around long enough. So cash and tracking revenues and expenses in a meaningful way, best practice, helps people do what they already got a sense of what they need to do. You're just affirming it. If it's done the right way, you have a seat at the table. It's not a hard conversation. It's just here's what's happening. They have already said yes to all these decisions. They'll come to the conclusion, and then you
Yeah,
just move on.
right. Man, that's great. Last question for you. I think a lot of artists and songwriters, when they're getting started and they might not have even had to file any taxes they've made such a small amount of money on their music. So they think this doesn't apply to me. Like none of this is relevant to me yet. I don't need to think about finance. I don't need to think about accounting. I'm filing a 1040 easy and it doesn't matter to me. What kind of general overarching advice would you have to I tell the students until and unless you sign with a record label, you are a record label. Until and unless you sign
Mhm.
with a publisher, you are a publisher. So start learning what labels do so that you can do what they do and learn what publishers do so that you can do what they do. What kind of advice from a CFO could we give to those people about thinking responsibly, thinking morally, thinking strategically, even thinking Christianly about their finance and accounting before they need to do it, so that when they need to do it, they're prepared. What kind of advice would you have for them?
I would say know what gifts God gave you and know what gifts He didn't. Stay in your lane. If you're a creative person, great. Find partners that do things the right way, morally, ethically, professionally, whether they're artist management, business management, your attorney, and surround yourself. You do what God gifted you to do, find the others and partner with them. Now, if you have a good business sense and you're good with money, then you can lean in a little bit more on that and do QuickBooks or something basic and do checkbook accounting until it gets big. But at some point, if you start getting traction and you're touring and you're trying to write and you're trying to go to that next level, you're going to have to decide where is your value add? Is your value add in the creative side and storytelling and the touring? If so, be willing to pull back from some of these other areas because you've got established partners, lean in on what's only you can do and go to that next level. But if you have the ability at the level you're at from an accounting side of it, which I would say 99% of them can't do that because they're being pulled in so many different directions, they can't pay attention to checkbook accounting. So, wife, mom, family member, whoever that is, it doesn't have to be a paid professional, but you got to have a partner. You can't do it all. So that's my best advice is know what you're good at, know what you're not, find people to partner with that you can trust that will do it the right way and ask the right questions of them and hold them accountable in a simple way.
Awesome. Man, thank you so much for taking time with us today. I hope we can talk to you again about this stuff down the road because it's a blessing to have people like you in the business. I think a lot of us artist types get skittish or we get nervous or really we get insecure, and so then we kind of cast aspersions or we think this is the Death Star and we don't we're afraid of it. And honestly, I think it was really fortunate for me to get to work in the building with people like you for almost a decade and get to see that kind of talent that you bring to the table and go, oh man, this is why things work. This is why stuff gets done. It's because people are thinking smartly and communicating clearly so that leaders can make good decisions and things can happen. Because I used to joke when I started True Tunes when I was a kid and I had a record store, I would have given all the records away. I didn't understand, but then
Yeah.
my boss would be like, well, then where will all the records come from next month? The mission stops. It's like, yeah, okay, so what do we got to sell these for? And I learned the hard way and through a lot of failure. So I hope that our students and other people that are watching this will be encouraged that we're a community for a reason. Fortunately, none of us have to do everything ourselves, but when we dabble in it and we read and we study, we can learn some of it, and then we can learn the value of what people like you bring. So, really appreciate your time.
I'm happy to do that. I take a lot of enjoyment sharing knowledge with others because that's the only reason I know what I know is I had a lot of people invest in me and I would be happy to engage at any time in the future. So just let me know. I'd be happy to step up and have any kind of conversation. Let me know.
All right, I'm going to stop the recording here.